I stared at myself in the bathroom mirror, a familiar stranger looking back at me. My fingers traced the faint lines slowly etching themselves across my forehead, tiny cracks in the facade I had worked so hard to maintain. Sometimes love isn't the hard part, I murmured. It's watching it turn to something else that's tough. A muffled chuckle from the other side of the door pulled me back to the present moment. Sarah, my best friend since college, always found a way to lighten the mood. Come on, Thea. We're going to be late for Ava's thing. Smoothing down my dress, I took a deep breath and rejoined the party happening just on the other side of that door. My eyes immediately found Saul across the room, his warm smile beckoning me over. He always had a way of making me feel like the center of his world, even when we were surrounded by others. As I made my way through the crowd, snippets of conversation swirled around me. Talk of career moves, new homes, and growing families. All the things I thought I had plenty of time for. Saul's arm snaked around my waist as I reached his side, anchoring me. There you are, he grinned, planting a kiss on my cheek. You know, I've been thinking. Here it comes, I mused, suppressing an eye roll. Saul never could resist an opportunity to pitch one of his big ideas. But before he could elaborate, Ava bounced over, eyes sparkling with the giddy excitement only she could muster. You two are just too precious, she gushed, squeezing my arm. I can't wait for you guys to start your own little family. The smile froze on my face as Saul tensed beside me. Family. The one loaded topic we had been studiously avoiding since our whirlwind marriage 2 years ago. I opened my mouth to deflect, but Saul beat me to it. Actually, I wanted to run something by Thea. He paused, gauging my reaction. My cousin Mira? She's going through a really tough time right now. Some psycho ex won't leave her alone, and I was thinking maybe she could stay with us for a little while. The words hung in the air as I processed his request. An indefinite house guest was the last thing I wanted cluttering up the life we'd built, but the pleading look in Saul's eyes gave me pause. He came from such a broken family. Was this his way of piecing one back together? Yeah, sure, if you think that's best, I finally managed, plastering on a smile as Ava squealed in delight. Little did I know that one decision would unravel everything. The doorbell's shrill ring shattered the peaceful quiet of our apartment. I glanced up from my tablet, brow furrowed as Saul hurried to answer it. This was it, the day our unwanted guest arrived. Mira, God, it's been too long. Saul's voice carried easily through the open-concept living space as he ushered her inside. I steeled myself for the introduction, standing to get my first look at the woman who would be occupying our spare room for the foreseeable future. Younger than me by nearly a decade, she had a delicate beauty marred only by the guarded look in her hazel eyes. Tucking a loose strand of chestnut hair behind her ear, she offered me a tight smile. You must be Thea, she said softly. I'm Mira. Thank you so much for letting me stay. The words sounded sincere enough, but something about her demeanor set me on edge. I forced a polite nod. Of course. Make yourself at home. Saul beamed, seemingly oblivious to the subtle tension crackling between us. I'll give you the tour. Did I mention Mira went to Cornell too? Best investment the old trust fund ever made. My eyebrows inched upward at his offhand comment. Trust fund? I couldn't recall Saul ever mentioning his cousin came from money, just more questions in the ever-growing pile. Over the next few days, Mira settled into our routines with unsettling ease. Quiet and unobtrusive, she was a model houseguest on the surface. But there was no missing the way Saul's eyes would linger a beat too long whenever she entered a room, or the slight flush that would creep up her neck when he was near. You're imagining things, Sarah chided one afternoon, swirling her wineglass. They're just a little too comfortable being related, that's all. I shot her a skeptical look, recounting the strange vibe I'd felt radiating off them during movie night. Mira had snuggled up on the couch with us, draping herself across Saul in a way that seemed overly familiar. When I'd questioned it, he'd simply laughed it off. Oh, come on. We've always been like that. Mira's more like a sister than a cousin, you know? Something about his words didn't sit right with me. If that was the case, why had I never heard of her before she showed up on our doorstep? And why had he emphasized the cousin connection so strongly? I just get the sense something isn't adding up, I murmured, leaning closer to Sarah. What if Mira's story about the stalker ex is a lie? Sarah's expression softened into one of concern. Are you sure you're not letting jealousy cloud your judgment here? You've got to trust Sol. Easier said than done, I thought ruefully, because more and more that trust felt like it was slipping through my fingers, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Mira was the one holding the key. The knock at the door was insistent, pulling me from the cozy cocoon of my thoughts. Frowning, I glanced at the clock. It was well past 9 on a Wednesday night. Sol was out at some work event, and Mira, well, who knew where she spent her evenings these days? Abandoning my cup of tea, I padded over to the door and peered through the peephole. A young man stood on the other side, vaguely familiar in a way I couldn't immediately place. Cautiously, I cracked the door open a few inches. Can I help you? Thea? Thea Coleman? He blinked in surprise, then broke into a wide grin. It's me, Drew, from the agency? Realization dawned as I took in his warm, open features. Drew Harris. We'd worked together years ago before I transitioned to my current role at Chapman & Gray. Impulsively, I pulled the door open wider. Drew, oh my God, it's been ages, I exclaimed, ushering him inside. What brings you by? I was actually in the neighborhood visiting an old buddy, he explained, settling onto the couch. We grabbed dinner. He mentioned you and Sol live just a few blocks over. His voice trailed off as his gaze slid past me, focusing on someone else. Spinning, I followed his line of sight to find Mira lingering in the hall doorway, clutching her robe tightly around her slim frame. Oh, I didn't realize you had company, she murmured, falcon eyes flickering between Drew and I. I can go back to my room. No. Drew spoke up quickly, startling us both. Sorry, you just reminded me of someone for a second there. An uneasy silence fell over the room as he regarded her with an indecipherable look. My skin prickled with a sense of disquiet, the awkwardness amplified by Mira's clear discomfort under his scrutiny. Finally, Drew seemed to shake himself from his reverie, huffing out an embarrassed chuckle. Where are my manners? I'm Drew, an old friend of Thea's, and you are. Mira, she replied coolly, recovering her composure with unsettling speed. I'm staying with Thea and Sol for a while. Drew's brows shot upwards at that, gaze swinging back to me questioningly. I could feel the heat staining my cheeks as I rushed to clarify. Sol's cousin. She's been going through some stuff lately, so we're helping her out. Right, of course. Something in Drew's tone suggested he didn't buy that explanation for a second. Well, I should get going. Early meeting in the morning, you know how it is. I walked him to the door, acutely aware of Mira's presence, hovering just out of sight down the hallway. As I turned back from bidding Drew farewell, she was there, eyes narrowed, lips pressed into a thin line. Thanks for the hospitality, cousin, she said, the slightest hint of venom lacing the last word. A shiver danced down my spine at her venomous tone, though I couldn't fathom what had sparked such open hostility. And just like that, a new sense of unease bloomed. Because suddenly I knew Drew's odd reaction had been born of recognition. He knew Mira, I realized with a start. And whatever their connection, she clearly didn't want me to find out about it. The envelope sat on the kitchen counter, plain and unassuming, but the contents within held the potential to detonate the fragile piece I'd been clinging to for weeks. You didn't have to do this, Sarah murmured, giving my hand a reassuring squeeze. We could have just confronted them. I shook my head, jaw set. And given them a chance to lie their way out of it again? No, I need proof before I go making any accusations. Taking a steadying breath, I tore open the envelope and pulled out the file within. Photos, documents, a detailed report, all methodically compiled by the private investigator I'd hired weeks ago when my suspicions first took root. Page by page, the truth was laid bare in damning clarity. Mira wasn't Sol's cousin at all. The two had been carrying on an affair for over a year, using her fake stalker story as a convenient excuse to move her into our home. Every tender look, every lingering touch, evidence of a deception so brazen it stole the air from my lungs. Oh, Thea? Sarah breathed, hand flying to her mouth as she scanned the documents. Fury blazed through me, scalding and all-consuming. How could he? How dare he? After everything we'd built, the life and future we'd promised each other, Sol had sacrificed it all for what? A cheap thrill with some younger, vapid thing? The tremors started then, racking my body until the file slipped from my numb fingers and scattered across the tile. Tears burned hot trails down my cheeks as the truth I'd been desperately avoiding finally crushed me under its weight. Betrayal, lies, deceit. They'd invited her into our home, into our lives, woven an intricate web of lies to disguise their indiscretions as something so simple as family obligation, all while disgracing everything we stood for behind closed doors. Sarah's arms enveloped me, gentle shushes filling my ears as I crumbled against her. For long moments, I simply broke, surrendering to the maelstrom of hurt and disbelief ravaging my heart. But just as that storm reached its crescendo, a strange sort of calm washed over me. Because in that moment, the path forward revealed itself with crystal clarity. I couldn't confront them, not directly at least. That would just open the door for more lies, more manipulation. No, if I wanted to extract my pound of flesh, I would need to keep my rage buried deep. Tend to it quietly, like Achem building strength for the inferno still to come. Let them believe their secrets were safe, their deceptions successful. Let them grow comfortable, arrogant in their supposed victory. Then, when they least expected it, I would detonate the truth in spectacular fashion, and revel in the ashes of the lives they'd so carelessly burned to the ground. This was my home they'd violated, my heart they'd shattered into cutting shards of shattered glass. And by God, I would make them bleed for it. The days blurred together in a haze of calculated deception after that fateful discovery. I moved through our home like a ghost, all traces of warmth and familiarity leached away by the lies that had tainted its very foundations. Mira didn't seem to notice my distance, too absorbed in the elaborate fantasy she and Saul were spinning. And Saul? He basked in the audacity of his own treachery, completely unaware of the reckoning I was meticulously assembling, piece by damning piece. It started small, an anonymous tip regarding irregularities in one of the startups Sol consulted for. Just enough to prompt a cursory audit into their financial records. From there, the trail of breadcrumbs only escalated, implicating him in a money laundering scheme to funnel investor capital into unauthorized projects. "It has to be a mistake," he insisted one night over takeout, brow furrowed in concern. I simply nodded, feigning the same confusion as Mira looked on with disinterested eyes. When the investigation inevitably ballooned, Saul would have no choice but to cooperate, give them access to his personal accounts, lay bare every sordid detail of the funds he'd been skimming these past years. It would destroy him professionally, but that was only the opening salvo. No, my true strike would come from another angle entirely, and with Mira as the incendiary device. I'd taken notice of her expensive tastes, the covetous way her gaze would linger on artwork or jewelry she couldn't afford on her receptionist's salary. A weakness I fully intended to exploit. So I planted the seed, an innocuous flyer about exclusive cryptocurrency investment opportunities. Then I sat back and watched as her greed blossomed into obsession, hours spent glued to her laptop researching the too-good-to-be-true pitch. Every question, every concern, I was there with a crafted response to push her deeper down the rabbit hole. Of course, there was no real money to be made. It was all an elaborate fiction, leading her on a digital trail directly into illegally solicited funds. Securities fraud on a massive scale with her unwitting participation smeared all over the evidence. It was the perfect snare. She'd think she hit it big, only to have the floor crumble out from underneath her. And with Sol already ensnared in his own financial crimes, they'd have nowhere to run, no one to turn to for help. Except, perhaps, the wife they'd so carelessly deceived. I could already envision that glorious moment of revelation. Picture the slick sheen of panic cracking their arrogant veneers as the consequences crashed down in a turbulent swell, sweeping away any possible escape. The very thought fueled me through those harrowing days, providing the strength to maintain my facade, to smile blandly and assure them everything would work out, right up until the moment I snatched away those reassuring lies for good. They'd taken everything from me with their deceptions, so I would take everything in return, leaving them with only the scorched remains of all they'd so foolishly destroyed. The air was thick with tension as the legal team from Sol's firm filed into our living room. His expression was pinched with worry, eyes haunted in a way I'd never seen before. Beside him, Mira radiated forced calm, but I caught the flicker of uncertainty in her gaze as it met mine. I don't understand, Saul began, voice strained. The audit findings make no sense. There has to be some mistake. I'm afraid the evidence is quite clear, Mr. Mirren, the senior associate cut him off, tone clipped. Funds have been systematically siphoned from investor accounts into unauthorized holdings over the past 2 years. Holdings that trace directly back to you. Mira's sharp inhalation was the only sound in the sudden, suffocating silence. I watched impassively as the truth they'd fought so hard to bury finally breached the surface in spectacular fashion. That's impossible, Sol sputtered, turning to me with wide, pleading eyes. Thea, you know I'd never. Don't, I stated flatly, holding up a hand to silence him. Don't insult me with more lies, Sol, not after everything you've done. For the first time since this nightmare began, something like genuine fear flickered across his features. My heart twisted with a vicious sense of satisfaction. Good. Let him know how it feels to have the ground swallowed from beneath his feet. The legal proceedings after that were almost anticlimactic. Saul dismissed from the firm, assets frozen pending criminal charges. Through it all, Mira remained conspicuously silent, her mask of composure slipping only when she thought no one was watching. It was almost funny, really. She had no idea her turn was still to come. The phone calls started a few days later. Overseas investors demanding updates on the private cryptocurrency opportunity she'd bought into. At first, I could see the confusion wrinkling her brow as she tried to deflect their frantic inquiries. But as the details emerged, that confusion morphed into outright panic. The whole thing had been a front, a fabricated long con to launder illicit funds through her accounts. And she'd fallen for it hook, line, and sinker, dragging herself into the very center of a massive fraud investigation. How could you do this? Her voice trembled with a potent mixture of fear and fury as she finally confronted me, eyes wild. I simply stared back, unmoved by her desperate pleas for understanding. You want to know how? I stated softly, each word dripping with icy venom. You came into my home and helped destroy my life with your lies and deceptions. This? I gestured vaguely at the chaos rapidly unraveling around us. This is just karma, Mira, the universe restoring balance. I watched, utterly devoid of pity, as the weight of her predicament crushed the last flickers of defiance in her eyes. Because as satisfying as it was to see Saul face the consequences of his actions, there was something even sweeter about witnessing Mira's world implode from the very greed that made her such an easy mark. They'd schemed and plotted, so convinced of their own superiority. Never could they have fathomed the depths of my determination to make them pay for each and every sin. But now, finally, the truth had set them free falling into the devastation of the lives they'd so recklessly destroyed. And I was going to savor every agonizing second of their descent. The sleek lines of the conference room offered little in the way of warmth or comfort as I strode inside, back ramrod straight. This was the moment I'd been meticulously architecting for months, the final reckoning. Saul and Mira were already present, each flanked by their respective legal counsel. Their expressions were studiously blank, though I could see the faint tremors of tension in Mira's hands as she clutched her briefing folder like a lifeline. As I took my seat across from them, Saul finally broke the heavy silence. Thea, I don't know what's happening, but this has all gone too far. Whatever you think I've done, I swear I can explain. Save it, I cut him off, ice clinging to every syllable. I'm done listening to your lies and excuses. All I want to hear from you now is how much this little charade is going to cost. Mira jerked slightly at my words, the first crack in her carefully curated mask of indifference. Good. Let her feel the tremors. It was a preview of the seismic upheaval still to come. Miss Coleman, her lawyer interjected smoothly. Perhaps if you'd clarify the allegations. My client has been relatively insulated from the unpleasantness surrounding Mr. Mirren's legal troubles. A tight, humorless smile tugged at my lips. Of course she has. But then, Mira always did have a gift for willful ignorance when it suited her needs, didn't she? I could feel the temperature in the room plummet as realization bloomed in her widened eyes. Slowly, jerkily, she turned to face Saul, an entire conversation passing between them in a matter of seconds without a word being uttered. Whatever she saw in his crumpled countenance was answer enough. You knew? She hissed, voice dripping with venom. All this time you knew she was onto us, and you said nothing? Sol's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. I thought if I could just explain things to Thea, make her understand how we fell in love. The shrill peal of Mira's laughter sliced through his feeble protests. Is that what you think this was? Love? She sneered the word like a profanity. God, you really are just a love-struck little puppy, aren't you? This was never about love, Sol. This was about the money, the life I wanted, that you were too weak to just take for yourself. Her tirade hit a fever pitch, the cracks in her facade splintering wide open as every oily truth came oozing out in lurid detail. I sat in silent witness as Mira flayed away Sol's illusions with each blistering word, exposing him as the pathetic, spineless fool he was. When the dust finally settled, their entire charade lay in smoldering ruins between us. Mira's eyes, those cold, dead things, finally swung back to bore into me. So this is it, then? She rasped. You get your pathetic little revenge, and Sol and I get, what, jail time? Financial ruin? My chin lifted a fraction, holding her gaze in an unwavering challenge. Not just that. Infamy. By the time I'm done, everyone from our inner circle to the blogger pariahs will know exactly what kind of depraved, vile snakes you truly are. She flinched as if I'd struck her. Good. Let her fear the total and complete destruction of whatever tattered remains of reputation she clung to. Let them both understand that this went far beyond money or misbegotten pride. What they'd done, the unforgivable betrayal and deceit, had burned away any possibility of walking away unscathed. They had doused the bridge connecting us in gasoline, then willfully tossed the match. And as the smoke finally cleared, all that remained was ash, and the inescapable consequences they'd brought crashing down upon themselves. The soft clink of champagne flutes mingled with the low murmur of appreciation as I moved through the crowd gathered at my new gallery's opening night. Collectors, critics, industry insiders, all drinking in the vibrant celebration of art and culture that had risen from the ashes of my former life. To Thea, Sarah's voice rang out, equal parts pride and admiration, for having the courage to take those lemons and open up one hell of a lemonade stand. Laughter rippled through the assembled guests as I accepted their warm accolades with a gracious smile. On the surface, I was the picture of poise, a woman reborn from the crucible of personal turmoil into something sleeker, sharper, stronger. No one would ever suspect the white-hot crucible of fury still banked behind my eyes. The gallery had been my ultimate revenge in many ways. Not just the business success built from the scattered remains of my divorce settlement, but a living rebuke to the wasteful lies and hollow ambitions that had fueled Sol and Mira's downfalls. While they scraped for whatever shreds of redemption remained after the brutal public reckoning, I had carefully curated an entirely new identity, forged from shattered trust, but tempered by an unshakable resilience. It's incredible what you've built here. A familiar voice pulled me from my reverie. I turned to find Drew beside me, admiring the soaring installation dominating the main exhibition space. His warm hazel eyes sparkled with appreciation and something deeper, something that made my pulse quicken traitorously. I'm glad you could make it, I replied, willing myself to remain composed under his openly admiring gaze. I know these sort of events aren't usually your scene. Drew chuckled, running a hand through his tousled hair. What can I say? I'm a sucker for a strong woman who knows how to thrive after getting knocked down. The weighted words hung between us, unvoiced understanding crackling in the stillness. Of course he knew. He'd been the one to first glimpse the mask Mira wore so convincingly, all those months ago. I'd never told him the full, sordid tale, but Drew wasn't an idiot. One look at the shattered remains of my marriage had been enough for him to read between the lines and arrive at the brutal truth. There was a reason he'd always been one of the few I trusted implicitly, even when the world seemed determined to strip me of that faith in humanity. You know, he began, voice lowering conspiratorially, I heard through the grapevine that a certain former startup mogul is struggling to land funding for his new venture capital project. My brows arched in mock surprise. Is that so? A wry smile played across Drew's lips. Reputation's a bitch like that sometimes, I guess. The reminder of Sol's professional purgatory sparked a flicker of dark satisfaction. After everything, it was no less than that self-serving snake deserved. Well, I murmured, allowing my gaze to linger on Drew a beat too long, I certainly won't be losing any sleep over it. His answering laugh was rich and warm, the sound curling through my senses in a way I hadn't allowed myself to feel in, well, longer than I cared to admit. For one fleeting moment, I was acutely aware of the effortless chemistry still simmering between us, the unspoken possibilities it hinted at. But the moment passed, as it inevitably did these days. Because no matter how far I'd come, no matter how brightly my new life burned, a part of me would always remain tempered by the crucible that had forged this renaissance. The hard-won wisdom of knowing that even love, true love, could be unmade by the insidious rot of lies and betrayal. In that way, I supposed Saul and Mira's actions had been a perverse blessing in disguise. Painful and severe, yes, but also permanent inoculation against the weakness of blind trust. I was stronger for having risen from their ashes, stronger, and so very much wiser. Because in the end, I had reclaimed the only thing that truly mattered, myself. And I would never relinquish that power again.